Germany's military has already lost more than 3 million dead over the course of the war, with another more than 1 million missing and taken prisoner. Her manpower reserves are completely exhausted by nearly 6 long years of total war waged across continents. An entire generation of German men has been devastated, and the German High Command is desperate for every living soul they can throw into the front lines. They've been scraping the bottom of the barrel for some time now. In September 1944, as German forces are pushed back further and further on both fronts, Hitler orders the creation of the Volkssturm, a sort of improvised militia separate from the army. It officially drafts males as young as 16 and as old as 60, but much younger boys sometimes volunteer and are sometimes forced to serve in its ranks. Some of the older men are veterans of the First World War, called on once again to fight and die for their country in a titanic struggle, but most have no military experience at all and are given only the most basic training and sparse and outdated equipment. Some even go into battle carrying weapons from the previous century. These old men and teenagers are hurled unprepared into combat alongside the army and take terrible casualties.
I am from beyond. Listen, and all you desire will be yours. Welcome to Spider-Dan and the Secret Wars. Prepare for Prattle.
Well, Danny boy, and plates of alcohol and from burn to burn, went down the mountainside. That summer's gone, when all the roses are fallen. Dead you must go, this you must go, but I must buy.
Welcome to Prattle World. I am your host, the ever-amazing, ever-spectacular Spider-Dan. And in this podcast, I spotlight entertainment's best-kept secrets that a mainstream audience may find boring. And welcome to Danny B Movies, where I introduce the guest and or myself to a cult movie. And it is part 2 of World War II month. And we're bringing you a harrowing tale from the other side of the war, from the Axis powers, the end of the war. Hitler's 1,000-year Reich was coming to an end very, 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 very prematurely. We have a tale of young, hopeful, go-getting young Germans who believe in the fatherland and what is being promoted by Hitler and his Reich. But then we have the rude awakening of what war truly is in 1959's The Bridge. So we are going to talk about that film. I really wanted to have a story that was outside of the kind of allies and the US and the UK and that kind of part of the war. We are not pro-Nazi or pro-Nazi in this thing. We're not talking about, we're not going, yeah, these guys should have won. Absolutely not. Awful, horrible thing. But I just wanted to have a different perspective on the war and have a look at it from a different point of view. But I also wanted it from a child's perspective, from a young person's perspective and living through that. So I picked this film, The Bridge, 1959. Andy is MIA or AWOL currently, as he's not with us just yet because he's dealing with his own child and his own little blitzkrieg, if you will, at this moment in time. So luckily, Max is here, one of the Prattalion. Not only is he a Patreon Prattalion, he's always here for it, and he's always well up for whatever I'm doing. So thank you, Max, for joining us for part 2 of World War II month.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on. It's a real privilege again. Like you said, I'm a patron of the show. I'm a huge fan to boot. So to actually be on is an honor. And this is my hat-trick appearance. This is my, if I'm not mistaken anyway.
I believe
it
so,
is.
yeah.
I think this is appearance number 3. We did the top 5 prison movies. We did Young Sherlock Holmes the other week. Well,
you know what? No, you're wrong.
Today.
You're wrong. This is number 4 for you because we did Predator 2.
Oh, Jesus Christ. So we did.
There you go.
So we did. Want some candy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of these kids, they never got their candy, but we'll get into it. But that's Max's his little quadrilogy there. So check those out. They're all amazing, great fun. I enjoyed all of those films on some level. So yes, another unique journey for us looking into this film. So let's. I'm just going to give a little bit of historical context. So this is based on a novel, and it was made. This film was fast tracked because the novel only came out the year before. Very popular in Germany and popular internationally, and then it was fast tracked and made into this film. And it is somewhat based on a true story. The writer of the book, struggling to remember his name. His name was
Gregor Dorfmeister.
Oh, well researched. He's there. Always dependable, Max.
Well read.
well read. Yes. Yes, Gregor Dorfmeister was a child during the war and was pulled into the Volkssturm, which is what this is kind of all about. The Volkssturm is the People's Army. It was Hitler's attempt at forming a militia at the tail end of the war, because obviously a lot of German soldiers had died at that point, so he needed anybody he could get. They pulled in old people, young people, children, girls, women, whoever they could to fight in the Volkssturm. And famously, it was one of his last appearances recorded for video camera was Hitler outside of his Führerbunker, the Führerbunker. He's thanking the boys outside, and they are all part of the Volkssturm. And they were very happy to meet their hero, quote unquote hero, Adolf Hitler. And he's obviously not in a good way, because, as we know what happens, as history tells us, but he's thanking all the kids for their bravery and their upcoming bravery in the fight against the Russians at this point. But yeah, he was being kind of pinned on both sides by the US and by the Russians. So he basically came up with this idea, because they were poorly trained, they were barely trained, they were barely given any weapons. The main weapon of the Volkssturm was the Panzerfaust, which is this kind of it's a rocket launcher effectively, and was very effective. One of the Volkssturm, I can't remember his name, but he managed to destroy 25 Russian tanks in one battle with the Panzerfaust. So yeah, and it's, again, they were recruiting very, very young, as we see in this film. The boys are barely teenagers, tweens, if that, and they're being recruited, and they couldn't be happier about it. So yeah, that's basically what this film is about. And again, it did somewhat happen. So Gregor was in the Volkssturm, and his friends all died in this no-win situation, because they were told to give no ground, to never surrender, to believe in what they were fighting for, and to stop any troops from advancing. That's what they were supposed to do. And that's exactly what they wanted to do and tried to do. And unfortunately, that led to Gregor apparently left his friends there. They wouldn't leave. And he survived, and they all died. So yeah,
it's mind blowing, isn't it, when you think about it? That scenario is it's completely unimaginable now. But to have literal school children conscripted into the armed forces in the midst of a world war and being made to do unimaginable things, just to stay alive, it beggars belief. I mean, that's what's so good about this film, isn't it? It really does put you right into that situation. For a film made in the late 50s, it kind of still has a bit of a contemporary feel, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's dated in some ways because it is a film from the 1950s, but the acting and the way it's shot still, for me at least, feels like a film made considerably a few decades later, I think.
I agree. I think when it comes to the violence, and at the end, like the last kind of half an hour, 20 minutes, like you don't just get a little bit of blood. It's like when someone gets shot, their fucking chest is coming apart, the back is blown out, Yeah. And this is quite hardcore. Like, again, this is not even into the 60s now, and we're seeing this kind of violence. It's hardcore, like visceral violence. And again, not only is it visceral, but it's all the more visceral because it's to children.
You certainly feel it more, don't you? These aren't hardened German soldiers, are they? No. I guess we'll get into it more as we talk about the actual film, but they've literally been conscripted the literal day before, haven't they? They hadn't even been trained to any great level of detail. It's, that just makes you feel the end all the more, the horrific way that it turns out for them. It's unimaginable, as a father of teenagers myself. You can't fathom them being made to do such a thing. It's certainly a different time.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we do get a lot of time with the children, like teenagers, I guess. But yeah, they are still children, and they are still acting like children and playing pretend. And there's that bravado, and there's that roughhousing, and there's and they're learning their place in the world, and you can just see the horror and the terror of these parents watching these kids go off to war, and they know exactly what they're going to face. And the kids are like, yeah, we're going to win, and we're going to do it for the fatherland. And there's some kids that are there that are really like drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and very much in line with the racial purity and things that the Nazis believed in, and all of the stuff that Hitler's been kind of promoting. But there's also, I like that you see a lot of the German people that are not just, because I think stereotypically we see it, everyone's like, oh yeah, Hitler's the best, we love Hitler. But I think this is a very measured and a very varied reaction to not only the people that are dealing with the wartime and what's going on, and trying to keep that sense of normality for their children, that sense of like, this is normal life, this is what we do, get yourself dry, you're soaking wet, what are you doing, you silly child. And you can just see the horror in their eyes, and just that anticipation of, I'm never going to see these children again, sort of thing. What's great as well is it's not like, oh, let's get straight to the action. Let's get to this, violence. And because it's an anti-war movie, effectively. That's what it's saying to us. And it's we spend a good hour with these kids before we get any of the kind of, the kind of standard wartime battles or anything like that. But when they do come, it's not like, oh yes, let's have some action. Like at this point, when you get to that, you're terrified. When the tanks roll in, I was dreading the moment when the tanks are rolling in, and you're like, it's these 6 kids against like 3 or 4 tanks. Like, how is this going to turn out?
Exactly, yeah, and that's like you said about the slow build to get to the combat section at the end is you get to see that wonderful contrast, really. And fair credit to the young actors in this as well; they're absolutely brilliant. But you get that first 45 to 50 minutes; they've got like this wonderful wide-eyed enthusiasm and borderline joy when they find out they've been conscripted. I mean, I suppose in those days, pre-mass media and things, and this is a small German town. These aren't city boys being called up. This is a small, looks like quite a rural German town as well. So they're going to be quite removed from what's actually going on out there in the world, aren't they? They'll get the information third hand. They'll have been fed, obviously, the propaganda of the time as well. So when they get called up, it's like it's the greatest thing that could have ever have happened to them. They absolutely are just beyond excited. And then you feel it so much more when the reality hits, like you said, when it's completely silent and you can just hear those tanks coming from the background. You just hear the whir of them very slowly. There's no dramatic music, no score. There's no score at all, actually, during that last section. There's some at the start, but at the end, no score whatsoever. And it's just that sense of impending dread, those close-ups on the boys' faces as they sort of stood there with rifles that they've been given 24 hours earlier, that they probably don't know one end off from the others. Well, most of them don't. No. And you just think, my God, what is going to happen to you? This is unimaginable horrors that await you. It's terrifying, really.
And like all the lads on some level are quite likable as well, and I think that's important. Even the ones that are really unlikable are still there's still a level of you feel for them because they're still kids at the end of the day. Even if they're racist or they're sexist or they're violent or they're a bully, you still go, yeah, but they're probably going to die. They're still going to die before their time.
Yeah, they're not made out to be demonized in any way. And what I also like as well is that they don't make out the Americans who obviously come to serve their end. They don't demonize the American soldiers either. They're not. Although the boys are your protagonists in this film, your heroes, I guess, of this film. Who are
they definitely see themselves as heroes, don't they? They definitely.
Everyone's the hero of their own story. But like you said earlier, they're fundamentally good people. They're not bad lads. They're not evil kids that, they're just normal kids who are swept up in this situation. But they don't paint the Americans out to be anything other than soldiers just trying to do a job. I mean, again, I don't want to skip too far to the end, but there's that wonderful scene where one of the boys comes face to face with the American soldier in the house, and he says, "What are you doing here, kid? Get away from this war. Get away from this war." It just, the whole film it kind of puts the futility of the situation under a microscope for me. There's nothing's glamorized, nothing's demonized either, and it just examines in greater detail how this situation could have been, we'll get to it, but how it could have been avoided. I mean, the circumstances where they find themselves in was a chain of events, wasn't it? A very unfortunate period of events. But just these boys, they deserved so much better than the hand they were dealt. It's not nice at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's I'll since Andy's not here, I'll defer to you. I think we've kind of talked about it, and we've kind of, I don't think we've spoilt it, but I think inherently that this film is going to be tragic from the get.
Yeah.
But do you want to give us kind of a brief kind of run over of the plot, and then we'll go into kind of more detail about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is set in 1945, and it's the very tail end of World War II. This is the literal sort of closing days and weeks of World War II. So they're in this small German town, and US forces are advancing through the country, I guess, on their way to the Allied victory. And in this town, there's 6 or 7 boys, like we've said, who are, just normal schoolboys going about their lives. And they are, they've all got their own sort of things going on. We get a bit of each one's backstory, their family lives. Some have happier lives than others. Some are dealing with some shit at home, etc., etc. Relationships with their parents or lack of parents in some respects. But they're recruited into the local army unit because, obviously, like you said at the top there, how older people and younger people were conscripted just purely because they needed more able-bodied people, numbers in the armed services, because, like you said, so many had died and they were short. So they're called into this army unit, but literally one day in that sort of army blockade, being trained to a certain degree, they're called out. They receive news that the Americans are approaching, and the unit is called to basically move out to join the conflict. But this, again, no spoilers too much, but these boys are very close. They have like this teacher at the school, don't they? This middle-aged man who's a really good sort of father figure, role model for the boys, a moral compass, if you will. And he goes and speaks to the commanding officer at the unit and says, "Look, these boys, they're good boys. They don't deserve the fate that's coming to them. So, we need to find a way to keep them safe." And this commanding officer's son had died that week. I think he refers to it in the meeting, saying his son had been killed on the front line. So he has a degree of sympathy for him. He says, "I'll tell you what, we'll send them to," basically, there's a bridge on the sort of outskirts of town that's going to be blown up anyway, but it basically it's strategically unimportant because we're going to blow it up, and we'll just put them there with one commanding officer who's experienced, and we'll just say your job is basically to defend this bridge, which you won't really have to do, and you could basically be able to ride out the conflict there. But then certain things happen and they find themselves completely alone on this bridge with orders to fulfill. They have the chance. If they wanted to, they could have run off. There's numerous chances to do it. There's a horrific scene where we see wounded German soldiers being brought back from the front line in horrific states. But these boys are steadfast because they've been told this is your orders. And then obviously the American forces eventually get there, and that's the incredibly violent and really well shot action sequence at the end. And then what happens. So yeah, I guess that's the plot in its simplest nutshell form, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about I tell you what, let's focus on like each of the boys. Why don't we do that? So let's who would you like to talk about first? Which boy? I've got a list of the names if that's helpful for you, or whether you need them or not.
Well, the one that sticks out the most to me, I think the boy's name was Walter. He's the one who, it's unclear at the start, is he sort of having some kind of illicit affair with one of the female teachers at the school? I think it's sort of not explicitly.
Heavily implied.
Yes, there's a lot of flirtatious moments between them, isn't there? Where they're going about the school day. There's some kind of frisson there, and I think just after they're conscripted, he goes to sort of pay her a visit in the school showers, doesn't he?
He does.
And
he does.
He does. Living out every schoolboy fantasy there, I think. But it's like you said, obviously, they're not going to show anything like that, particularly back then as well. But he sort of goes in the shower after her, and then the scene kind of fades to black. So it's implied he might have got up to a bit of something in the shower with this lady teacher before he goes off.
I love that that's the first thing you think about with this character. Who went, I got to shag a teacher. Brilliant.
Well, he's the one character who seems to have a modicum of joy in this film, isn't he? I guess so.
Arguably,
you've got to be grateful for small mercies for these boys. But yeah, he seems to be the one who's probably the most physically able of them. He's the one who rises to the occasion most at the end, isn't he? With the, forgive me, I forget the device, but yes, that's the one you referred to at the start, which he uses very effectively at the end as well, and takes out a tank or two.
And then not so effectively as well.
Yes, and it's him. Yeah, and it's him who actually is the one who comes to face with the American soldiers as well. So yeah, he stands out as kind of, because he kind of looks like that all sort of German poster boy of the time, doesn't he? He's got the blonde hair. He looks like you would expect him. He is, yeah. He looks like a paid-up member of the Hitler Youth, doesn't he? Sure. But he's not. Let's not tar him with that brush. He doesn't display any right wing. I mean, there's one telling scene as well when he's at home, and he's I guess he's having a cigarette or something, just sort of contemplating what's about to happen, and he's playing it's kind of jazz music or something like that, and then he's told a message related to him about to turn that Negro music off, doesn't he? I think that's what they say. Yeah. So again, he's not displayed as having any right wing particularly leanings, despite sort of outwardly at least fitting the bill. So I liked him. I think he was quite an interesting dichotomy of a character, isn't he?
I liked his relationship with his parents as well. Like, his father is like the he's kind of a head in the kind of, I don't know, the bureaucracy of the Hitler Party, the Nazi parties. He's not a soldier per se, but he's kind of organizing stuff. He's kind of like the paperwork man, the office man. He's kind of organizing stuff. Yeah. And I'm not sure what the correct term is. I'm sure it's written somewhere, but he's an administrative part of the Nazi party, let's call it. Right. But, and straight away he's like, get this, get that, and he's running around. He's like, I need this and you need that, and we're doing this. And he sends his wife off, out of the town for her safety. And his son, Walter, sees her leave during school and runs out of school and runs to the train and waves her off, because he's like, I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. It's like, oh, she's fine, she'll be safe now. And he's like, I hate you. Why are you doing this? You're only sending her away so you can sleep with other women. That's the only reason you're sending her away. And he's like, you shut your mouth. And again, later he's got the maid, and it's heavily implied he's been sleeping with his maid. And he says, don't play that kind of music here. And he basically, and then he's leaving as well. The dad's leaving, and he's like, oh, I don't want to be like you, because the boys find some schnapps and some alcohol hidden away, and they're drinking it, and he's drinking it, listening to his music, smoking a cigarette the day before he goes to the army. And the dad's like, you're gonna have your, you're gonna be straightened out at this, at this camp. You're gonna learn respect. You're gonna be, you're gonna be, all of this, negativity that I view as negativity is going to be squelched out of you. It's going to be, the drill sergeant's going to drill it out of you. You're going to come back. And he's like, oh yeah, like a brave man like you. And his father slaps him, and, and it's like, yeah. So there's a lot in there that's going on. And yeah, he is arguably the most heroic, arguably in the like you said, he's the most effective, arguably, in terms of being that action hero type, but also he's a bit of a bully, like with his friends. With his friends, like Sigi is the little guy, the little dark-haired lad, and a lot of people make fun of him because he's small and he's sensitive, and they and he's the one that he's always picking on because he is weak. And he is the weakest of the group, and a lot of the other lads take issue to this, because it's like, you're a bully. Why are you doing this? There's no need. And he's like, oh, I'll strengthen him up, and he needs to be tough. But he is that kind of bully, and that kind of that macho kind of presence. But I think that's him being brave because his father isn't. And I quite
outdo his father, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like, oh, you're the office man, you're the administrative man, you're not on the front lines, you're not doing what you should be doing. You're a coward, you're yellow, and I like that aspect of his character. But yeah, I thought his was an interesting journey. But let's talk about Sigi as well, since I kind of mentioned him. I really like Sigi. I really, really like Sigi, and I think you should. I think the idea of it is like he's, he loves his little chicken. He's got like a little chicken there. Yeah. His mum's like, his mum is worried. You see him. I think out of all the parents, you probably see his mum the most because she's the most concerned because she's like, they can't possibly draft my child into this war at this age. He can't be a soldier.
Yeah, they're all kind of around the age of 16, aren't they? It's never explicitly, their ages are never, I don't think, explicitly referred to, are they? But I think they're supposed to be around that age, aren't they?
Yeah. Kind of, early to mid-teens. They're all in the same class, so they must be in the same age group. That tiny, tiny class. Just happens to have all the main characters in. Oh, well, look at that. What a coincidence. He's excited, but he's a positive kid. Like when the opening of I love the symmetry of the film as well. That kind of circular kind of, we return. The beginning is about at the whole town's in like, oh, there was a bomb and it went off near the bridge. What's the damage? And it's this same bridge that the kids return to because they go, oh, we're right back on our hometown. What is this? This is rubbish. Why are we back here? We want to be on the front line. And like, no, you should be happy because you know this. And we see kind of little bits of setup as well. We see the sniper position is the tree house that they use.
Wonderful example, isn't it, of childhood innocence being corrupted into something far worse, isn't it? The literal child's tree playhouse, and then becomes a bloody sniper's crow's nest.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really well put together, I think, by the director to use that. Yeah,
it's very, very. There's a lot of layers to this. Again, I think what you were saying about the cinematography, it's gorgeous cinematography. This is currently on YouTube, but it's only on YouTube for like the next 3 days. So by the time this podcast comes out, it's probably not available. But I would recommend renting, buying, whatever. Get hold of this. I think if you're into war movies, and I think it's absolutely a must see. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's got 100% fresh rating. Not many reviews, but it's there, and I would recommend it highly. I love it. But like Ziggy's in that treehouse is what I was getting at. He's looking and seeing the devastation of the bomb, and he's like, no, we're all good, no casualties, no damage, absolutely, what a win. And everyone's like, no, it's boring, that's not interesting. And he's like, no, this is good, this is good news, we're fine, everyone's fine, it's structurally stable, don't worry about it, we're good, everything's fine. So he's this positive, bright, and all the kids care for him because he's the young one, he's the small one, he's the one that maybe isn't that good at these kind of masculine war type things. Like it's just him and his single mother, but there's another character as well we'll get into. But it's just like the classic kind of tragic mother figure. It's like the Women of Troy or something like that, of just these women just like mourning that their children have gone off to war and died or going to. And we even get her. There's a moment later on during the battle where she doesn't know Ziggy's dead. She doesn't know these kids are there fighting directly outside the window. And she's like, "Oh, my son." She's talking about him, and we know as the audience he's dead. He was definitely one of my favorite characters because it's and the way he dies as well. Like, we're going into spoilers now, but he's made fun of because is it a plane goes over or something happens and he ducks or he hears noise, and
he's sort of made fun of because he's not perceived to be as brave as the other kids, is he? He's more of a cowardly figure, so he sort of decides to show them who the brave one is, and that's how he pays the ultimate price, doesn't he?
And that's it. And everybody, like, he ducks for cover like prematurely when he hears something, and everyone's like, ha, 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 Ziggy, oh, you're going to win the war down there, all that sort of stuff. And then later on, we do see a plane go overhead, and they all do duck for cover, but Ziggy doesn't. And he's stood there, and then everyone's like, we see them looking around, and like they all get up and go, "Oh my god, that was a close one! I can't believe they're firing on us." And then we find Ziggy dead, and it's the first kind of like realization that this isn't fun and games. He was the best character to lose first. I think, considering what he represented.
He's a very good initial sacrificial lamb, isn't he?
Who would you like to talk about next of the boys?
I like the boy. I think his name was Carl, who's like this sort of, again, another blonde kid, and he has an altercation before they get signed up, doesn't he, with the other kid? I think his name was Klaus, and he basically gives him a right hander in the face, doesn't he, and makes him bleed. And as a sort of pointless aside, I remember thinking as well that the sort of blood effects on this kid's nose look in black and white look just like the Venom symbiote coming out of his nose. It's we were discussing Venom symbiotes before we went on air, and this could be an unused clip from Venom 3 or something like that. But yeah, so sorry for that aside. But yeah, he has a disagreement, but they end up working together at the end. One of the boy, Klaus, is on this sort of automatic rifle, and he's there next to him, sort of feeding the chain of ammunition through it. That is probably the most heartbreaking death, I think, at the end, when poor Klaus is taken and Carl doesn't realize he's gone, because he's kind of slumped over the gun, isn't he? And Klaus essentially goes borderline crazy, driven by grief, doesn't he? And just basically picks up his rifle, jumps out of this makeshift trench that they've dug for themselves, or ditch, a glorified ditch, I suppose, and just runs like he basically is a madman and just runs straight into enemy fire. And that, to me, is the most heartbreaking death, because he has a very young face as well. He kind of, I don't want to sound flippant, but he kind of looks a bit like the Milky Bar Kid in his appearance. You know, I'm not making light of the situation, but just as appearance, he's got that blonde hair and a kind of like cherubic kind of face.
He does, yeah. Yeah, you are right.
And and the acting as well from the boy, when he discovers that Klaus is dead, he has this total emotional breakdown, and he's like screaming, "No, Klaus, come back!" And he apologizes, and he's saying, "Look, I'm sorry I hit you. I'm sorry I did all this. Come back. I need you." And then when he realized, obviously, Klaus is no longer alive, just that horrific run to his death. It's that was the one I think that got me the most. I think
I put their surnames as opposed to their first names. So I've got Horber's the kid who gets punched. That's his surname. So
yes,
he's the one who fancies his dad's girlfriend. That's the one I've put him down as.
Yes.
So he is he's kind of almost a class clown-esque character. He's throwing mice at Klaus's girlfriend.
The mouse, yes, yeah.
Yeah, he's finding a mouse. He throws it at her, and he's kind of a bit of I don't know. He's a bit sexually immature, or like he's a little immature maybe in terms of like girls, and he's still trying to work that out. He's still a child, but he's kind of hit puberty now, but he's finding that transition difficult, I think. And his dad has I think it's a live-in, works downstairs. Is it a barbershop?
He's a barber / hairdresser. Yeah.
So she's working in the barbershop and lives with them as well, I think, sort of, or at least he's very close. And he's very much in love with his dad's girlfriend. He doesn't know it's his dad's girlfriend until later. Yeah. And I thought it was an interesting choice as well, because his dad is injured. He has a false hand. So and I was like, okay, that's why he's not in wartime, because he's injured, and he's and I thought that was an interesting choice as well. And there is a lot about kind of cowardice and being brave and in this, and you notice that a lot with the characters. They keep egging each other on, like, you're a coward, you're a coward, you're a coward, you don't believe in this. And it's almost, and again, it's themselves egging themselves on to be brave and not to run away or retreat. And again, that comes in again to the end when they're fighting these allied troops, and they're coming in, and you're like, they should run, they should go away, they should, and there's many opportunities, like you said, for them to give up, to stop, or to run away, but they don't. And that's the inherent tragedy of it. They've been taught to believe in this and believe in what they're doing is right, and that's the main issue. But he finds out that this young lady who he fancies is with his dad, and he starts just having it like an absolute meltdown. And Klaus, who is with Francesca, who is another girl at school, and they have a very close relationship. He gives her his watch, which has glow-in-the-dark dials, and and they have a lovely little, very sweet, loving relationship. And and it's interesting to see when they make like very adult decisions and very like immature decisions as well. They kind of go between both as well, because they kind of like they're trying to be men and they're trying to be, you know, do what's needed to be, but then there's still that childhood element of their previous, you know, life coming through and filtering through. And their little relationship is really sweet and very touching. But then Carl is like, oh, all women are slags, all women are sluts, you know, because the woman he fancied sleeping with his dad, so he goes mental and he's like, I don't want to see you, I don't want to hear from you. And that's the line when, after he's argued with his dad and he leaves early to go to be conscripted, he stays overnight at the barracks or wherever it is. And when as he leaves, his dad's like, oh, he's acting like he's in kindergarten. And then one of the Americans, when they're fighting, says, they're kids, we're fighting kids. What is this, kindergarten? And then he understands that. He's like, kindergarten. And that's when he goes mad and starts shooting. And then he gets inadvertently shot. And because they've had that disagreement over Franziska, you know, being called all those horrible words, that's why Klaus feels so bad, because he's like, no, I forgive you. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry I punched you. You know, we're still friends. Like, wake up. You know, we're still best of mates. And then again, like you said, he goes in and he just absolutely breaks down and just doesn't care, just has like an absolute psychotic break almost, and just starts shooting everybody.
It does, yeah. That's the tragedy of the film. It's got of boys who are on the cusp of becoming men, who are then thrust into a situation where they've got to be men, but ultimately will never live to become men, if that makes sense. It just, you know, it's the whole tragedy of this event is really does sort of put that into perspective, I think.
Now, we also have Bullshit, who is the dark-haired lad who he comes from quite a well-off family. His dad was an officer, he's died, and his mum is kind of holding down the fort. He even makes a comment on how well and how kind of stiff upper lip she is, and how well she deals with all this. And she's clearly like I think the acting is superb, especially from the kids as well. Like we talk about like kid actors a lot and how bad they are and how, you know, how poor their acting skills are. But in this, it's just like, it's another level. And then the arc is incredible. The performances are, when you get to that finale, you're on board with them. You're not on board with the Nazism, definitely not. But you kind of hope they're going to make it. You know, you hope that they're going to win out in this particular battle, or they'll give up, or, you know, they'll decide not to attack the bridge, or maybe they'll realize. And again, because his dad has died, he considers this like almost becomes, again, this is the one I was talking about, who is called Broschert, I think.
Yeah, Jürgen, I think his first name.
Yeah, Jürgen, that's right. And he's the one who drinks the Kool-Aid. He believes in like the fatherland and the 1,000-Year Reich and everything, because his dad died. He doesn't have a dad anymore, and he believed in it. So I've got to believe in it. And the mum is great, because again, she's this, you know, it's all on the inside, but you can see it coming through, even though she's like, yeah, I'm fine. You know, let's stay a bit later. Let's have some more food. Let's have another drink. She gives her son the dad's gun, to take with him, and he's so joyous and so happy, and, you know, and is just like dying on the inside, but she won't show it. You know, unlike Ziggy's mum, who's in bits kind of not constantly. She's this kind of very reserved, and again, he makes comment on how well reserved she is. But then when he gets into the war aspect, when he gets his orders, he's like, right, I'm going to get in the sniper hut or the tree house. I'm going to take, and he's like, why are you taking so many bullets? He was like, well, I'm going to need it. I'm going to be up there and I'm going to kill as many as possible. And, you know, the officer's like, okay, sure, whatever you say. And he really is like, he's the one who's just a fanatic. Just an absolute fanatic. He's like, no, we've got to do this. This is what we've been told to do. I will die here. I will follow my orders to the end of the letter. In this no-win scenario, this no-win situation, I'm gonna go to the absolute end, because that's what my dad did.
Yeah, they just don't know any better, do they? And you feel for the mothers, because this is only 20-something years on from World War I, of course. So they know, they've lived through it once before as younger women, or or probably the same age that their boys are now when World War I was happening. And so they know what's to come, and they know the chances of survival if you're being sent out to the front lines, it's pretty fucking slim. So, you know, you do feel for these women. They're trying to be stoic for the boys.
Yeah.
But they, you know, like you said, there's husbands who are not there, fathers who are not there, and you know they know it's essentially a death sentence, isn't it? But there's absolutely nothing they can do about it. You know, they can't be that. You know, a parent's supposed to protect the child, but there's nothing they can do to stop it. It's the law, isn't it? So if they tried to, they'd be arrested for treason or something like that. So you really do feel for the mothers in this film.
Oh God, you feel for everybody, and even the people that are authoritarian or in you know high-ranking power, like even the dad who's like really abusive to what's his name?
Walter.
Walter, yeah. So even his dad, even though he's like, go off to war, you know, do all that and come back a better man, he you can see it internally that he's like, fuck, my son is going to die, and this is. They're kind of, a lot of them are kind of just saying things because that's what's supposed to be said, and even though they know inside in their heart of hearts this is wrong, like the police officer with Sigi, like he takes him back as he finds Sigi kind of sneaking some of the schnapps that they found, and he's like, you're not supposed to have this, you'll go into jail, and he's like, no, I'm being drafted tomorrow. And then they go home and he has the letter and the mum's in pieces and she's asking the officer, she's like, what do I do? How do we stop this? And he's like, nothing we can do. And like, even he's in disbelief. He's reading the letter and he doesn't believe it.
No. But we do get a false moment of hope, don't we? With the teacher managing to negotiate that they'd be put in this sort of fake defense of the titular bridge. And that, you know, for all intents and purposes, is their way out, their way to survive, isn't it? So there is that moment, you know, without any prior knowledge of this film, there is that moment where you think, oh, they've managed to provide them a way where they're not going to have to, you know, get their hands dirty and be involved and risk their lives. They can just basically be glorified sentries, if you will.
Yeah.
And you know, this is great. This is fantastic. This teacher's done a brilliant job, and fair play to the commanding officer who agrees with him as a bereaved father himself. He says, yeah, okay, well let's sort this out. We'll stick them here. It's strategically important. They'll be just fine. And so there is that false dawn of where you think, oh, that perhaps they'll come out the other side of this okay, and then obviously events conspire to deal them a very different hand, don't they? My God,
it's really quite sad. But there's two boys we haven't talked about yet. So it is Muntz, and again, I'm doing the surnames, but Scholten and Muntz. So these are the two boys that live together. So Muntz is there living with his mum, and they've not heard from their dad, Muntz's dad, for some time. And Scholten, his parents have moved away for whatever reason, and they're living together. So they're kind of brothers in a sense, brothers in arms. They're living together, and the mum she's holding it together just barely. Like, you can see how tired and how kind of desperate she is to hear something. I think it's been 23 days since they've heard anything from the dad. And Scholten is probably the guy who you would consider, he's morally, I'd say, the best of them. Like, morally, he's like, he questions things, he's reasonable, he doesn't become a fanatic, he doesn't believe all the orders, he doesn't go rushing headlong into danger, he's careful, he's probably the most intelligent, he's kind to Sigi. And Muntz is kind of he's a bit of a blank slate, I think, a little bit. But given the ending, I think I kind of know why. We won't spoil it entirely just yet, but he's the one where I'm like, you know what, genuinely, he's probably the nicest of all the boys. Like, he's the one that shows the least negative parts of themselves. He's not necessarily the most interesting, but he is, I'd say, morally, he's where you would want a child like that to be.
Yeah, you feel very sorry for him as well at the start, like you said, because they haven't heard from the father for so long, and you can see the mother's at a wit's end, and he's continually saying to her, isn't he, oh, it'll be fine, it's just because they're probably about to mount an offensive, and as such they block any post in or out because it can give secrets away, and the post falls into the hands of spies and things, you know. And you can tell he believes what he's saying as well, doesn't he? He's not he's not saying it to comfort his mother. He genuinely believes that his dad's going to come back unscathed. Whether he did or he didn't, that's up to the audience to decide. His dad might have been alive, you never know. But again, it just highlights that innocence of that boy, the borderline ignorance as well of the outside world, because they're living in this small town where they're kind of cosseted from probably a lot of the travails of life. In a way, it looks quite an idyllic little town, actually, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It looks really it looks like something out of The Sound of Music or something like that.
It does.
In a way, it does.
Slightly sadder ending, I'm sure.
The Sound of Music's ending is a bit more triumphant than this, that's for sure. But a World War II picture nonetheless.
Yeah, true.
It is, yeah, and a good one at that. But yeah, so again, it's that journey from A to B to C, isn't it? Very much the A side is the boys and their lives and the school, and like you so eloquently put out about the different things that they're up to, and then there's that B section of being conscripted into the army and the happiness of it, generally speaking, anyway, and the enthusiasm, and then obviously the final stage of that arc is the realization of shit, we've got to do this kind of thing. So yeah, I think but yeah, the film to me is all about the acting and the dialogue, isn't it? I think that's the writing and the performance, particularly of the young male leads, is what carries the film. It's not action packed until the very end. We'll talk about that last 20 minutes or so is phenomenal, as an action set piece. I think it's superb. But for me, the whole film it's a very, before you get to that, it's a very sort of almost a small, intimate story, isn't it? Where it is just absolutely about the acting. There's no sort of
it could be a play.
Yeah. We don't suddenly cut to the front line or cut to a government office where you get sort of bigger backstory. It's literally just a small town story, isn't it? Intimate. And so I think the performances purely carry this film. I think, you've already said it, these young lads, these actors are superb. I mean, well versed enough to know if any of them went on as they became older and had distinguished careers in the 70s and 80s in German cinema or European cinema. But they also, you don't look at it and think such an actor's not carrying his weight or anything like that, or perhaps his performance isn't believable. I watched this and I fully believed it. I believed every performance that was on the screen. There's no, sometimes, especially with older films as well, sometimes the acting style can be a little dated, can't it? Or the way lines are delivered can be a little stilted and perhaps lacking in realism. All of these lads, absolutely superb performances, really, really good.
Just even the framing of the shots, and like when that tank comes into view and you're just like, fuck no. Like you were saying, that scene where he gets punched is really good. That's very that feels very European, that shot when he gets punched, and it's like just an extreme close up on his face and that bit of symbiote in his nose. I think some of that is gorgeous. I think the sound design is fantastic. Like the way that first bomb comes in, you're at the waterside, you hear the and then the water explodes, then that kind of that push up into the bridge, and then the words come up the bridge, or Die Brücke, if you want to go by its German title. Gorgeous, and that kind of clanging of metal, that like chung 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 kind of that noise. It's just like that. It's almost like the knolling of the bell, the death knell of the bells. For whom the bell tolls. It's tolling for these boys, and it's. I just thought it's gorgeous. It's beautifully shot. I just think it all just comes together wonderfully, and it's massively effective. And again, like I was saying earlier, we've talked about the kids, so let's talk a bit more about the adults and the performances of those. Like again, it's showing, again, it's not going, Nazism is great, because even the soldiers aren't interested. Like there's not one soldier there which is like, apart from the kid who's like believing in the fatherland, Broshirt, whatever his name is, Broshirt. It's like Broshirt. But there's not one character that's like, I believe in the racial purity or extermination of the undesirables or anything like that. They're just like,
no.
There's not one where I'm going, okay, this is a bit meh. Obviously, there's the guy who, again, the dad who says turn off that black music, doesn't use that word, but there's that. But apart from that, there's not one. Most of them are like lazy or can't be asked or jaded or depressed or injured, or there's not one person there who's going, "Yay, Nazi Germany!" They're just doing what they think they need to do to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no flag waving Nazis in this this cast, is there? There's no one like that. There's no one who you really think is a villainous. There's only one character who perhaps comes out of it looking like a piece of work, and that's the guy who, when they're sent to the bridge and they're sent with this veteran officer to supervise them, who's been like their training officer in the barracks for a whole day, and he goes away, doesn't he? I think to go and get refreshments or something like that, and leaves on the bridge. But then he's sort of accosted by some, I don't know what he is, like a military police or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Who mistakenly accuses him of being a deserter, and then obviously he panics, and it leads to one thing leads to another, and that's the end of him. But yeah, I suppose that character who's like the job's worth.
Yeah, or the general in the car. The general in the car he gives like a speech about what you're doing for Germany and we're going to win and all that stuff. And then he's just off in because the teacher. I really love the teacher in this because he really sells. He really sells, like, obviously he loves these boys. He's like, and he's like, look after my boys. Like, he's given up teaching. He's like, I'm not going to be a teacher anymore because I don't believe in this. If you're gonna used child soldiers, let's put it as plainly as it is, they are child soldiers, which is it's always a no in every conflict, and like for this it's like they were like, oh, we're desperate, so we're going to just do it and hope for the best, and hopefully we can take a few more of them with us as we inevitably are defeated in the war. And he goes, please consider it. And he's like, well, my son died, are you saying that my son shouldn't have died in the war, and what are you saying? And he's like, I'm not saying anything. I don't, if you believe in it, fine. But these boys are boys. Is there anything you can do to protect them? And he's like, no, they're going to go and they're going to fight for Germany. And they're going to do what they're supposed to do, just like my son did. Again, I believe in it because my son died doing it and he believed in it. But eventually he softens and goes to the general. Is like, there's some boys in this particular Volkssturm unit. Is there any way we can put them? Is there anywhere that's not? It kind of, in a way, is trying to like. And again, there is assistance there. There are people trying to avoid this tragedy. There is a lot of attempts by all these adults and they're all trying to stop this. They're not going, off you go, great stuff. They all regret this decision. They all regret this idea of conscripting children. And at every point, every adult character is, for the most part, apart from maybe the dad, the abusive dad, everyone is trying to stop this on some level. And we, again, that soldier kind of gets the general. The general's like, fine, just send them there. The bridge, that'll be fine. Because that's the inherent tragedy of it, is the misunderstanding, because the bridge is going to be destroyed.
A month later, on April 20th, 1945, Hitler's birthday, just 10 days before his death by suicide, Germany's increasingly helpless leader makes his last public appearance outside of his heavily fortified underground bunker. As Soviet artillery pummels Berlin and the suburbs of the city are turned into bloody battlegrounds, he again meets with Berlin's child soldiers, handing out medals and encouraging them to make the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Hitler will never again leave his bunker alive. Now, in the final weeks of the war, as Germany's situation crumbles, children are enlisted wholesale. The Volkssturm is routinely drafting children as young as 12. Allied soldiers report encountering armed enemies as young as 8. Thousands of young boys are pulled directly out of grade school, given little to no training, handed weapons, and sent directly into combat against the unstoppable Red Army. In Berlin, entire battalions of young Hitler Youth boys are formed and told to hold the vital bridges that allow reinforcements into the city. Reinforcements that existed only on paper. Others are told to ambush Soviet troops as they advance down Berlin's broad, rubble-filled streets. Some young children are even formed into suicide squads and told to charge Soviet tanks with grenades. Parties of SS soldiers roam the ruined cities seeking out deserters. They execute them, shooting them or hanging them from lampposts as an example to others that desertion offers no way out. Even the youngest soldiers are executed for giving in.
He's no longer MIA. Angry Andy is back for World War II month. He couldn't make it earlier, but he's here just when we need him. Right as the tanks come rolling in, he's here to defend this bridge. Andy, me and Max have been talking about the film en masse. You know what it's about. Let's hear what you think of 1959's The Bridge.
I feel like Tom Cruise at the end of Saving Private Ryan. I'm like trying to shoot off that tank on my own, and God, it's chaos. So yeah, sorry for the delay. Shit happens, doesn't it? But man, this film, so Christ, I didn't expect it to be so good, if I'm going to be like brutally honest. I was very, very pleasantly surprised by this. And considering when you look at it, it's come out 14 years after the end of the war.
Yeah.
And it's quite a brutal depiction of just like the desperation from the side of the Nazis. You know, the extreme lengths they go to or went to, you know, to try and salvage anything from the war, and the horrible sort of position they put their own citizens in under the guise of propaganda, you know, that forced a lot of young people and old men as well to basically put themselves to the sword in one way or another. I know you've already probably discussed, haven't you? This film is obviously about 7 lads brought in to the ranks, sent to the front line immediately. However, they get, you know, some smart sort of captain realizes, you know, the folly of doing that and says, look after this bridge. It's not important. This sergeant will look after you. No issues. But it all just goes fucking horribly wrong, doesn't it? And it's shocking right the way through, I think. But it's still such a brilliant thing. If I didn't know this film was like made in 1959, I would have said it was some kind of like really cleverly crafted 80s war movie made to look old. It plays so really fucking well. It's written incredibly well. It's shot incredibly well. I'm in awe of it, actually, to be quite honest. I need to get, you know, a hard copy of this, you know, to store it away, because I thought it was fucking brilliant. Really, really good film. And like I said, incredibly shocking and quite poignant as well.
We talked a little bit about the Volkssturm, because that's what this is kind of inspired by, and the kind of militia and stuff. Being our military and historical expert for this month, what do you know about the Volkssturm and the kind of bunker boys and all that sort of stuff?
It's all just propaganda, isn't it?
Yeah.
All just propaganda, essentially. It's like, this is the fatherland, you've got to protect it, you're the future, you know, you've got to do all this, you've got to do that. It's, like I said, it's just pure desperation, you know, to try and salvage some, I don't even know. It's not courage, is it? It's just delaying the inevitable and sacrificing all those people for nothing, really. You know, are we seeing it kind of now in present day with what's going on abroad in Ukraine and with Russia and all that? Is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing the exact same thing? Soldiers being sent to fight a war that this weekend especially that's just gone, the weekend of the 26th as we are, you know, some crazy shit has just happened over this weekend involving a fucking military rebellion that seemed to have got quelled immediately. But you never saw anything like it up until that point. War was always supposed to be a very honourable thing, but at this point, it's just send them forward. They say it in this film, like, lambs to the slaughter, or, you know, cannon fodder. Everybody's depressed, people are retreating, and yet, you know, they're told, well, you have to look after the fatherland, you have to save us, and it's pure folly. And this film plays it very well. You've seen it in many war movies. You've seen it in documentaries of, you know, kids being used on the front line towards the end of the war, especially, you know, to defend Berlin against the Russians. It was absolute fucking carnage and a massacre. And it wasn't just young kids, it was old men as well that, you know, weren't able to, they were too old to join the armies, and yet they were forced forward, you know, to defend the fatherland. And it's not necessarily being like a home guard like we had here to defend the beaches. It was, you know, these people were literally standing in front of burning buildings and expecting to throw down their lives. Shocking, crazy.
And again, we've talked about the inherent tragedy of this. Interesting as well. The director, Bernhard Wicki, who directed this, and I think he won lots of awards for this in Germany. This was nominated for an Academy Award, but it didn't win. I think it was Black Orpheus that won instead. I've not seen Black Orpheus, so can't say. But he before he was a soldier in World War II, he was in fact a clown. So he was supposed to protect a French resistance fighter, and he would act as a clown to entertain them. This is prior to them learning whether they would die or not.
Fucking hell.
So the guy knew what he was fucking talking about. Again, and the writer obviously of the novel was based on his personal experience. It says in the film, right at the end of the film, spoilers, but it says that this was not recorded because it was considered so insignificant. It wasn't recorded in the history of that area or what had gone on.
Yeah, and that's quite to me, that's the heaviest hitting moment in the entire film. It's like all this sacrifice you've just seen wasn't even enough to be noted down in somebody's fucking journal, a war journal. That is fucking crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But there must have been numerous things of that. Things covered up, things lost.
Yeah,
it's such a massive war across multiple continents. There will have been more kind of stuff like that would have happened, and not necessarily buried under the carpet, but just lost in the absolute chaos of what was going on with everybody involved.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, 6 lives lost, isn't it? But I suppose, like you said, Andy, in the grand scheme of the whole war and the massive undertaking that World War II was, I suppose it wouldn't be considered a key event in the events of the war. But to the people involved in this story, it couldn't be more important. That just goes to show there is no insignificant event in a war, is there? Everything's significant.
No. Yeah, and I think that's what this film plays to, doesn't it? I mean, these boys are desperate to prove themselves and to do the right thing, but they're not old enough to understand what the right thing is. There's people around them saying, this is all going to shit. The captain that basically says defend the bridge. He knows the war is lost, and even that sergeant knows the war is lost. And they're like, well, I'll look after him. I'll stay here. And it's just really fucking sad that he's doing something good. He's doing something nice. He's going to go and get them some coffee, and keep them warm and look after them. And some fucking busybody calls him a deserter. And just because if he'd taken his rifle with him, they wouldn't have called him a deserter. That's what's really fucking, he should have made another choice. He'd still be there. He'd still be alive. Perhaps these boys wouldn't have been,
That's the inherent tragedy. I was saying this earlier before you came on, Andy, that, he's trying to protect them. He's been told by his superior to protect them and to really look after these boys. And again, he's not told them that they're going to blow up the bridge at the end. They're just there. They just know that they've got to defend it. That's all they've got to do.
Yeah. Because obviously the sergeant wants to give them some hope, make it seem like they're doing something for the war effort. So when the war's over, they don't feel like they've not done anything. So the sergeant's trying to play it. So they're like, oh, well, we're doing this. That's why they're saying, if I go up in that tree, there's a really good spot there. And he goes, yeah, you go in that tree. Good on you. He's encouraged them to do things. They feel involved. And yet, if anything were to happen, if we speculate that forward on in the film, the sergeant hears these tanks coming or sees these retreating soldiers, we might have made decisions to say, right, we're going to pull back as well, and then we'll detonate this bridge because obviously, something's not going right on the front line. We'll secure it here. No problem, boys. We've done our part.
And it's not just a bridge. It's their bridge. This is their town. This is their bridge. Going past this bridge, you get into the town and their families, their mothers, their fathers, everyone's there. Like, it's orders and it's a bridge, but it has personal stakes as well. Not just like, oh, we're going to follow the orders because that's what we've been told to do. Yeah. This is our life. This is our thing. Again, we start with the bridge and we end with the bridge. And the whole tragedy of him just going to get some coffee and not taking his gun, and then they're just left. And then again, they see this truck comes in with all the injured soldiers, and they're like, "Here, have some chocolada, lads, before you die." And Max was saying earlier they're absolutely just in bits. And again, they don't believe in the war. And we were just saying again, there's nobody in this who's going like for the fatherland, or there's nobody who's like, "Oh yeah, I'm a proper Nazi. I believe in racial purity." Nobody believes in this war and is ready or is convinced it's going to end in a positive way. We were working towards the kind of battle scene, Andy, and what happens at the end. Yeah. So we've not really talked about it too much. We talked about it briefly, but Max, what do you think to the final battle scene before we get into it kind of full on? I know we've teased it a little bit.
I think it's superb. I think it's considering, like we said earlier, considering when this was made, it's as good as something you'd see in something like Saving Private Ryan or something like that. These real action-packed World War II set pieces. This is superb. Considering it's obviously not shot with a huge budget. And I read somewhere as well that the tanks were made out of cardboard or something. Oh, no, sorry, not cardboard. What am I saying? Wood. They were wooden, like the framework of the tanks was wooden, but they look so realistic, and everything about it is just done beautifully. The violence as well is very uncompromising. People just don't get shot and fall over like clutching the chest. There's guts spilling out. There's blood and gore everywhere. It feels very, very contemporary stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, the exit wounds surprised me as well.
Yes. Yeah,
the exit wounds are horrific, and one of the best shots in that battle sequence for me is the sniper rifle shot where you see the reflection of the kid in the tree as the sniper lines him up. What a fucking shot that is! I mean, today, by today's standards, it's a bit of a goofy shot, because you don't get that kind of reflection, like a mirror reflection.
No.
But it tees up like what's going to happen perfectly, and then again, it's thoroughly uncompromising. He gets shot out the tree, and when he lands with fucking horribly like deafening thud, and there's no movement at all. It's just straight down. He's fucking dead, and his fucking shoulders blown out, and you can see it. Like there's just a huge hole in his left shoulder, and it straight to the point. He's dead. He's gone. There's none of the writhing around that you see, in some war movies, like even westerns where people are writhing around or over exaggerating the deaths. You get that one with the American soldier, but that's played to a point, for a very specific reason, because everyone's just fucking fried at that point. Everybody's shell shocked. They're all buggered, but it's just uncompromising right the way through. Absolutely uncompromising, and the sound as well. Sound is inch perfect. It's so visceral and painful as well. There's no music. It's just complete gunfire, tank blasts, the treads, the sounds of the treads. Saving Private Ryan, Steven Spielberg must have seen this film, I think, because the sequence in Saving Private Ryan when the tanks are coming in and the sniper's up in the tower and he's relaying, what's happening, what's coming, Tiger tanks, 2 of them, Panzer tanks, 2 of them, and you can hear the treads in the background. You've got that in this film, and it doesn't drag it out. It plays the tension perfectly. You can hear the treads coming from, what must be like a mile away, and you can hear them gradually coming closer. That tension's building up, and then we get to that point where it just starts, and it's relentless, absolutely relentless, absolutely perfect.
It doesn't stop, does it? It's about 25 minutes of non-stop combat. It's beautifully shot and doesn't pull any punches. And we've spoken about it length tonight, but the acting of those boys in that scene really does highlight the horror of the situation.
Yeah, 100%. Really well acted throughout. Like you can just see like they're utterly confused by everything, but they're driven by what's been drilled into them, and they're obviously determination to do what's right for their home, what they perceive as being right. Again, towards the end of the film, they're chastised for doing it as well. It's fucking horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah. What are you doing here? Why are you doing this? Oh, we've been told to do it. Well, it doesn't matter. They're coming and we're doing this. And again, and then the general in the sidecar, and it doesn't fucking work. And he's like, we're going to leave.
It's like a comedy moment from Indiana Jones, that, isn't it? Where the sidecar just gives up and he's like, fuck this shit, throw it over the bridge.
But I love the dissension between the boys as well, because they're like, well, they're leaving. What if they're leaving? We should leave. We can go. We can. No, we've been told to do this. And then again, they have the argument, and then they're challenging each other, going, "Are you a coward? What are you? Sort of, you're yellow. You're going to surrender. Is this how we're going to win the war?" And they're constantly challenging each other all the way through, and then we get right to the end where the demolitionists turn up.
Yeah.
All the boys are dead apart from 2.
Yeah.
The demolitions turn up and they're like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "Oh, we've been told to blow up this bridge." And they're like, "What?" They're like in absolute disbelief. Like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Those are the orders. This was never supposed to be defended, really. It was going to be blown up anyway." And they're like, "What do you mean? This is a nothing. This is not like a pivotal place or location in this war, in this front. This is a nothing location. But again, it means something to them because not only is it their orders, it's their bridge, it's their town, it's their lives, and they're all dead, and they're basically being told, your lives meant fuck all.
Yeah. They literally died for nothing, did they? Because they died defending a bridge that didn't need defending, that was going anyway. That just shows how futile the whole thing was. And at the end, they're still defending the bridge with the boy Hans or Scholten, the boy who survives. He starts shooting the demolition team because he's still he's still defending his bridge. This is his own side now. He's survived the conflict with the American soldiers, and he's still defending his bridge from his own side. And so what happens. It just the whole event was completely pointless, and their deaths were completely needless. That's what really hammers it home at the end.
And there's various people coming up to them as well, like you were saying, Andy. They get chastised. An old man runs into town, going, "What are you boys doing here? They're coming. We need to evacuate. Everyone needs to evacuate." No, you're a coward. Get lost. And they kind of shoot at him and laugh, like, And there's some real I love the varied reactions and the varied performances we get out of the boys and the various emotions and what they're going through at any one moment. The acting is bar none, is brilliant. And then later we see Walter manages to, again, Max was saying how effective he is as a soldier. He has the Panzerfaust, the weapon of the Volkssturm. He's taking out one tank. He goes into the house. He sneaks in. He's covered in like gasoline at one point. And then the old man comes back in because the American soldiers are in the house, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And then he tries to stop him, but then he gets blinded as the Panzerfaust goes off. Again, it hits the tank on the outside of the window, but then the explosion just brings the house down, like a house of cards just come crumbling down, blinds the old guy. They all die. The tank is blown up, sure, but what at what cost?
The ultimate cost.
I mean, that's the fundamentals of the Volkssturm in general. Like they were formed, like I said, to do a very specific task, but all the major conflicts that they were involved in towards the end of the war were unsuccessful. The Allies walked all over them. The Russians walked all over them. They offered nothing because they had no experience. So they were literally thrown, like we see in this film. They'd been trained. They hadn't even been trained. They'd signed up literally that morning. They had nothing. They didn't know what they were doing. They were given this shiny, fancy gear, these brand new weapons, and told, "Off you go." It is the very essence of cannon fodder. It's just the very essence of cannon fodder. But with these boys, they're determined to save their town, aren't they? And this fucking bridge, which absolutely meant fucking nothing, and yet meant everything to them. And it's such a weird thing, really. They're so attached to doing the right thing that they pay the ultimate price for no reason whatsoever. And it just makes you wonder how many other kids and men did that towards the end of the war, and what price. Obviously, unfortunately, the Volkssturm were commanded by the SS. They were told to do horrible atrocities as well, to try and shore up the final solution as well, which is just awful. So these people were put into, along with German civilians, they were forced to engage in these activities that many of them probably didn't even know were going on, to be fair. And it just hammers home the sheer desperation of the Third Reich in the final days, in the final months. It's bad shit, man. Yeah. But going back to what you're saying about all these people coming through from the other side of the bridge, and it's very haunting, isn't it? Because the film plays it really well with this mist and this fog. They're almost like phantoms coming through from the other side, aren't they? Like showing like you need to stop, because obviously you'll be like us, all these people that come across, these injured soldiers,
the Walking Dead.
Yeah, exactly. They're almost like, heed the warning, boys. These are your three warnings. These are your three ghosts coming to you in the middle of the night. But heed the warnings. The old man comes across the the nice, friendly old man who tries to tell them, go home to your parents, go home to your mums and your brothers and your sisters and look after them. Leave this bridge, leave this place. Nah, no, we're going to defend it. The injured parties come across. Oh no, ignore them. They're cowards. They're retreating. And then the general, the final one. Oh, a general's retreating. Should we? No, and then that's it. They've not heeded the warnings. Probably clutching at straws, but that's the imagery I got because because they all come through, and literally when the general comes through, that's when it starts brightening up, isn't it? It's like your chance is lost, your window's gone. You could have left under the cover of fog and darkness and not be seen as being cowards because nobody would have seen you, nobody would have known. But now in broad daylight, you're in trouble. Now you're stuck. You've got nowhere to go, and they don't.
A few more things before we come to an end. It was remade this in 2008, another German production. I've not seen it. I've only seen this one. I'd kind of be interested, but also I kind of don't know if it's necessary as well. But it exists, so it's there. Off the success of this, a Bernhard Wicki co-directed. I don't know if you've seen this, Andy. The Longest Day.
Yes, I have. Yeah. Wow.
So,
I didn't know that.
There you go. So it did something for him in his career.
Yeah.
So
it's a great film, that.
Yeah, I need to watch that. I need to watch that one. I might, off the back of this, watch that, to be fair. And Bernhard Wicki was talking about his kind of clowning and his time in World War II. There's actually a memoir called Our Strange Gardens, which is about his time in the war, and they made it into a film as well called Strange Gardens. Strange Gardens. It's a French film apparently, but yeah, it's based on his life and dedicated to him. So if you want to know more about that particular story and his experience, then there you go. You can have a look at that. But yeah, like we were talking about the Volkssturm feature quite heavily in Downfall as well, which I think is. It could have easily made us. Well, we could have easily talked about that till the cows come home. That film, but yeah, the kids fighting in the streets and trying to. They're in Berlin, so that was the exact. And I think they show up in Jojo Rabbit as well. I was just
going to say Jojo Rabbit. Yeah, Jojo Rabbit. That's the whole frigging premise of the film, isn't it?
Because he's a Nazi youth, isn't it? And it kind of came out. The Volkssturm kind of was born out of the Nazi youth a little bit. Obviously, there's a version of it in this film. It might not be as accurate or historically accurate, but it's kind of that idea. And I thought that was interesting. I was saying at the start of the podcast, Andy, that I wanted something. A view from the side, Germany's side of perspective, but I also wanted something from a child's perspective on war as well. And I think this film kind of married those two, and again looked at that kind of more historical context of that as well.
100%.
But yeah, any other things you guys would like to say, Max? Is there anything you'd like to say about the film before we finish?
I think over the course of the piece, I've covered everything I wanted to talk about. But I just think, in sort of summary of the film, it's just it works as beautifully as a wonderful time capsule of a horrific period of time, but it doesn't. To me, I've already mentioned it, I think, but to me, it stands up really well under a contemporary light. It's not aged as such. The performances are fresh and vital. The cinematography is out of this world. The action is really superbly shot. I just think it as a wonderful cautionary tale and as an incredible film that will pull on your heartstrings as well. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I'd literally never seen this film until yesterday, Dan, when you said that, this is what you wanted to do. And I'd left it till yesterday to get around to finally watching it. But yeah, it is, I think, just a brilliantly made film. I think it's one of the very best films I've ever seen of World War II. It really is, especially one that's told from the other side of the coin. This isn't an Allied film. It's British soldiers. It's not American soldiers. It's soldiers who are technically on quote unquote on the wrong side of history. Yeah. But they're not on the wrong. They are not on the wrong side of history. They're just doing what they have to do. But I think it's fantastic. Highly effective film, and certainly one I'll probably go back to again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with Max more. I'm so glad I made an excellent choice, just like Catch-22. Another great choice from me. Excellent work, Dan. Excellent. I love this. I think it's incredible. I think Max is right. It is one of the best war movies I've ever seen. Highly recommend it. Andy, what do you have to say? What are your final thoughts on The Bridge?
Die Brücke. Yes, I mean my thoughts will echo Max's. To be quite honest, I mean it is a really brilliant film. Like I said, an hour and a half, just over an hour and a half, and it doesn't patronize, it doesn't overextend its welcome, it doesn't play itself in any sort of patriotic way either. It is literally lamenting the fucking needless carnage and death towards the end of the war. I mean, a Band of Brothers did a very similar thing with the final sort of few episodes, lamenting sort of needless loss, and again, you know. Maybe some points were taken from this film as well by Mr. Steven Spielberg, but you know, when you look at other films that try and do the same thing, so like Saving Private Ryan, it tries to paint war as a very chaotic, needless waste of life, and yet in that film there are sort of patriotic elements to it. This film has none of that. It has none of the overwhelming patriotism. And you'd be hard pressed to do that, in a film about Nazis fundamentally.
Yeah, in a German film about Nazis,
exactly.
At that time when it was still fresh,
as
well. Another thing as well, I forgot to mention that was there was a recruitment drive at the time for kind of young trainee soldiers when this came out. The Bundeswehr were recruiting at that time, around that time, and in the mid to late 50s. And so this was actually quite politically relevant even then, even at the time of the film's release. This was saying something about recruiting children into war, basically. So it definitely has some. So, and like Max was saying, it's still effective now. The messages are still the same. It looks good. It's gorgeous to look at, even though it's God knows how old it is. 60, 70 years old, however old it is now. But yeah, absolutely, it's fundamentally one of the strongest war films. Again, it's not nationalist, it's not jingoistic, it's not about that pride that sometimes I think a lot of American films, like you were saying, go into, or even some of the British films as well about the subject can do. It is just like, this is horrible. It doesn't matter where you're from, what side you're from, what country you're from, you're watching this film and it shouldn't be happening wherever you're from. And that's why you feel for these kids, because it doesn't matter where they're from.
Yeah.
Because they're just kids.
Yeah, exactly. Sides become irrelevant, don't they, in that situation?
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, on that somber note, I think it's time to call it a day. Thank you again, Max. You've been great. Thank you, Andy. I know you're struggling to make it, but I'm so glad you did right at the end.
So am I.
I would have. You came in like those tanks rolled in right at the end, and we were just like, oh no, Andy's here now. We're dreading it. No, it was amazing. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I'm so glad you did and managed to find the time. Max, where can people find you on social media and find all the good stuff you've been involved with previously and stuff with me as well?
You can find me on Twitter at Maxi Byrne, which is spelled MaxyByrne. If you go there, there's links to the various websites I write bits of nonsense for, and links to the Mandatory Music and CD podcast that we've got. A new episode came out last week. We've got a new one recording in a couple of weeks, so please do check that out if you like your music. Go to Twitter at Comics in Motion P as well, which is where that show's found, and a whole host of brilliant shows as well. So check it out.
I'll leave that all in the show notes for you, Maxi Byrne, as well.
Lovely stuff. Thank you. And thanks for having me on. It's an absolute treat and a privilege for me. Thank you.
Every time. You're great, Max. I love you very, very much.
That's cute.
Please don't end up like any of the children in this film, please.
Oh, God.
I'll try my best.
Please stay away from bridges, just for the near future. Just stay away
bridges and trees. Stay away from bridges and trees.
Especially. Andy, where can everyone find your angry content?
You don't want to find me. But if you do, you can find me on Twitter at Andy_review. And then obviously on YouTube, it's Angry Andy Reviews. And I'm still doing everything on the fly because I can't get this fucking room of mine finished. I hate decorating. Really, I should do a video series on that, but I can't be bothered because it'd just be carnage. Nothing would ever get done. But there you go. Yeah, there's my main basis of operation. But yeah, that's
Excellent.
it. That's all I've got.
Again, I'll leave it all in the show notes. Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed this. I'm glad that you gave this film a try, and I'm glad it was as good as I hoped it was going to be. So, and it's effective. And again, it works really well with the theme we've already started with Catch-22, and what we're going to be discussing with Paul and Ria coming up in the next few weeks. Again, I don't know what's coming next because I have no fucking idea what the order is or who's going to be available, or if Andy's going to be here with us. Who knows?
I don't know.
We just don't know anymore. It's pure chaos, much like the war itself, as we've discovered in the last two podcasts.
What an analogy.
Podcasting this is my war. This is my own war. But yeah, thank you guys. As always, you can find me on Spider-Dan and thesecretballs.com. It's got all the links to podcasts and social media and all that good shit. So please subscribe to the Pop Culture Collective newsletter to find out what myself, Comics in Motion, and all the other related podcasts are up to week by week. And I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon, Angry Andy, and Maxi Byrne, and Paul Meller, Simon Cottam, I'm Jack's Musings, Mike Burton, Tonya Todd, and Tony Farina, and Math. Thank you, guys. Your continuing donations help Prattle World keep on turning. And thank you very much for the support. And if you find yourself in a position where you can help the podcast, please consider it. Thank you, guys. I'm going to salute you both, and we're going to sign off. So salutations, gentlemen. And we'll see you next time for another Prattle and joining the Prattalion. So I will see you later, and we'll see you on the other side.